I want to keep the time here for you guys to look ahead some. Now, some people may have to leave early, so I may ask them for their thoughts and concepts rather than just go around the table in the normal fashion. So things that are on there, here are some of the things I'd like to discuss, and you help me set the time frame and the sequence of it. The impact of the printing industry with your technologies and the economics. We've talked about some of that. A whole range of people could do things. So I'd like to hear what you feel and how that changed. The word social impact is a word that hits me, that so many of these organizations make a change in our social fabric. And that may be something you guys have either appreciated or have information on. How is this related to word processing? I know that there's a level of what you can do that word processing can't, but is there an intermediate ground? And how has that changed over time? Now we're looking ahead beyond the 2000 time. We're in the 2000 and on time frame. The effect of the internet and the web. I'm just giving you a range, and then how we go from these. The future prospects, what you see happening in the next 10 years that will be dramatically change the publishing industry or change the way the work is done. You bring up your own topics. This is an open discussion.
I'd like to ask Jonathan. Jonathan? No, I wanted to ask you a question. You had, in the early days, in the 83 time frame, my count on the number of graphic artists in the United States was like 275,000, something like that. Do you know what the number was?
I don't know. I mean, that seems like a likely number, but I don't recall any independent verification of it.
So the current number for Creative Suite from Adobe is an installed base of what, 8 million?
Much
8 million.
worldwide.
Yeah,
Paying seats.
paying seats.
Yeah.
So
Who are they?
everybody.
Well, give me some examples. You just sell them. You don't know what the hell they do with them?
No, well, it turns out that the desktop publishing revolution has empowered sort of ordinary mortals to be incredibly creative, whereas in the old days when the 275,000 number was there, you had to be really good with a repetograph pen, you had to be really good at a waxer, you had to have an intimate relationship with a typesetter service bureau, you had to cut out a lot of paper, you had to paste it on a lot of cardboard. And that was the population who could do graphic arts.
I had to heal quickly from stabbing yourself accidentally with an X-Acto knife, too.
I have a question. Did the X-Acto knife people go out of business as a result of you guys?
No, but Letraset is a very small mini present than it used to be. It used to be a boom, press-on letters used to be a booming business.
I'm going to be selfish. There's two people I want to ask to start with, and then we'll just sort of go around the
Okay.
room. Chuck, I'd like to guess your thoughts on any of these subjects, what's happened since 2000, what you see happening in the future.
Oh, my God.
And
Well-
you've got exactly 3 minutes.
You know, I'm a businessman. I can't tell you about the future because you might beat me there. Well, I want to echo what John was just talking about. There are so many people today who feel like they can design something, but they were never able to realize that because they never really had the motor skills to do it. Having an idea for a design is very different than the ability to actually create it. And we've now changed that dynamic in a way that many more people feel like they have the power to actually do the creation of it. As to where we go in the future, you know, the world of information distribution and sharing has changed so much because of desktop publishing. And the one technology that's made probably the most dramatic impact on that is Acrobat. If you think
Acrobat.
Acrobat, if you think about the amount of money and the amount of environmental damage you do to put everything on paper, if you think of what it costs to transport that paper, if you think about what it costs to store it, and if you think about what it costs to search it, you can see that this has had and will continue to have an even more and more dramatic impact on the world. You know, the printing press had a tremendous impact, sociologically, politically, all sorts of ways. Now we are putting information at the fingertips of people in ways that we've never done before. And it's a combination of things like Google that lets you search for it, but it's also the way you can present the information, get access to it, and search it that have changed dramatically. I have a little Fujitsu scanner on my desk. I don't store paper at home anymore. I just throw it in this scanner. It converts it to a searchable PDF, and I throw it onto one of these gazillion terabyte disks that I have, and that's, my life is different. And my access and my ability to recover information is completely different. So I think we're just beginning to see what the impact of all of this is going to be. And the way information is going to be created is going to be less and less static and more dynamic. People, the kids, you see what they're doing today with mobile devices. They're creating movies, they're doing all sorts of things, and they can share them and distribute them and store them and keep them. That's changing things. And
Life's
that's the kind of change I expect to see continuing and continue to expand.
Larry, I know that you might have some time issues. I'd like to ask you to be next, if you don't mind. And get closer to the mic, please.
The publishing industry is one of the first to be disrupted by the digital revolution. So that's, in a lot of ways, it maybe could be a model for some other industries as to what they should expect, hope for, fear, et cetera. And I think the publishing industry may be unrecognizable to somebody who looked at today's industry 40 years ago. But it's a lot of the old traditions of aesthetics, which several people have mentioned here as being very important, have been preserved. So that's something I think this group should be proud of.
Sorry, Larry. My fault.
That's okay. I finished.
You're finished? Come on.
It's
I
really
expected-
good, too.
Yeah, it was really good. You missed it.
We'll have to consult the tape.
Not gonna watch that damn tape? Is that what you're telling me?
Don't forget to look at the tape.
I have no particular order of the thing. If there's some who want to start next, Chuck,
I
would you
just
like
want
to
to make a
start?
quick remark. Looking around at my colleagues here, many of us who have gray hair, one of the things I noticed when we sat down, you gave us a pad of paper and a pen. This is probably one of the last generations that can be expected to actually use handwriting to take notes at a conference like that. In 10 years, they won't know what to do, but they'll have either voice or some other method. So we might be among the few that can still manipulate these writing instruments.
I still remember when Tom Haig was coming to our meetings, first thing he did was put his computer on the desk and started taking notes the entire time. And if I wanted verbatim transcripts, what anyone had said, Tom had all that information. That was shocking to me that someone would do it. And now it's common, particularly if you're a younger group, half or more will have a computer sitting on their desk, right, in front of them. Yeah. Go ahead. Who wants to speak?
I just wanted to say one other thing. It's just in 1983, I published an article in Scientific American about digital typography. And here's the first page of it. And I was asked at the end by the editors, can you predict what the future will be?
Good.
So I thought, okay, I'll make a wild guess. And in 1983 or 1982, when I wrote the article, a commercial typesetting shop maybe had 200-300 photo fonts. A big one might have 1,000 in New York City, but that was it. And so we said here in this article that there would be creative design coming, and there would be a synthetic system in which the type designer can interact rapidly with a computer and immediately see the effects of design on screen. And there was no such system yet, we said, but one would be coming. And when that was ready, there will surely be a flowering of new letter forms as the digital era, like the eras before it, enters its creative phase. Now, and this turned out to be true. Several years later, Adobe brought out the Adobe Originals, and other firms followed suit, and now every day there are young people. There's 100 times, 1,000 times more type designers than there were 30-some years ago. What I didn't say, and I'm glad I didn't say it, but I'll tell you, is that I thought, okay, there will be more original faces. If we have 300 or 500 in 1983, maybe we'll have 2,000 by the year 2000 or something. Today, the biggest type firm has somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 fonts for sale. Some are copies and versions, but it was far beyond what I could predict 35 years ago.
I have a question. You need so many? That's the punchline of a lot of jokes.
Which we won't repeat now, yeah. But anyway, there's a lot of fonts, and this has been due to not only the vastly expanded market, but the much better tools that came from that Adobe has used and other companies have sprung up with.
Are there some countries that have created a greater number of these kinds of type fonts? Or I'm thinking about the Chinese, the Japanese, these other kinds of languages.
It's enabled, yes. There was no practical way for that font market in Japan and China to explode because there were no tools that you could produce them. I mean, it's just too much. A Chinese alphabet has 20,000 characters.
But also, China and Japan have an enormously much stronger tradition of calligraphy than we have in the West. And so
Well, this is the point I
a
was
lot
getting
more motivation.
Yeah.
But this is what I was getting at. I know in English we have the different letters, but of those 20,000, are there 10 variations of each of the 20,000s that have different artistic quality? Or
Oh,
different...
absolutely. Now there are.
So that's been another whole range.
Yeah.
And in Arabic. In fact, as you may have read, the city of Dubai has just commissioned its own font for Dubai in an elegant Arabic style. And all of that was almost unavailable in traditional metal typesetting.
But
So it's-
Hebrew.
Hebrew also.
Are they keeping up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's several firms in Israel that have large
Devanagari.
varieties of
Yeah,
Hebrew
I
fonts.
mean,
So when you're speaking 50,000, are you speaking just in English?
yes.
I think we can, 70,000 if you include the whole world, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Incredible. What else? Who else wants to? Go ahead, Lee.
This is actually kind of a question about PDF. I heard a stat, and this is probably maybe 10 years old, that when a new version of PDF comes out on the web and everyone has to upgrade because you want to, that it's something like in 48 hours, like hundreds of millions of systems, maybe it's billion systems are upgraded. What's the number?
It's billions.
Billions, yeah.
Billions.
So when they rev PDF, everyone needs to get the newest reader because the next document that comes down might have that format of it, and so you've got to pull down the new version.
We've standardized it to an extent that if you're with the US ISO standards of PDF, we have very meticulously kept forward and backward compatibility so that you can read the documents. Very few, even in new versions of PDF, you use Acrobat 7 in your scanners. I mean, we have attempted to judiciously keep it so that it's both forward and backward compatible. A lot of the upgrades are for security reasons and for reasons of robustness and reasons of expression across things, but it's taken incredibly seriously to keep it incredibly robust.
Well, you shouldn't be surprised that it's billions of updates because every digital device with a screen has PDF on it, just by default.
Dave, you had a comment? I'm sorry, I'll be right there.
Every smartphone.
With PDF having become the standard by which we save everything, is there going to be an archival issue someday about readabilities of the
Well, that's
My
what we
PDF
take,
today?
that's what we take really seriously.
There's an archival form of PDF.
Well, I use the archival PDF,
Yeah.
but is that, I mean,
It's damn
it's
good.
going to stay?
It's better than what libraries do.
No, it's meant to be robust, and we didn't even attempt to approach the standards committees with.
But most
Word.
people, I would guess most people don't save an archival PDF. They just output whatever PDF is
But
in their device.
most PDF files are really portable.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
really, really portable. So we're probably more proud of that product than any product, because it really,
And I think you should be. I mean, the software industry does not, by and large, build things for the future, and PDF is. You know, C, for example, even though the fact that it's a standard is because it changes slowly now.
yes.
It didn't used to.
But it's still true that Coverity, which is a company that sells software that analyzes C programs, in the paper they wrote, they said, one of the first things we learned when we started dealing with customers was that there's no such thing as C.
Right.
Every major customer has their own slightly different C.
Liz, you had something you want to say?
Well,
Go ahead.
I wanted to add a comment, sort of following up on John said. I think what desktop publishing has done in the social context is given everybody a new voice, a voice that allowed them to, quote, take information, not only present it in, obviously, first black and white, and then color, and then images, and et cetera. We've given them the ability to direct it to who they want to, by customizing limited editions of things and producing art that, on the fly that they can either sell or produce. I think we've just given the world a voice, and the question is, where is that voice going to go? Is it going to be
One of the interesting things, I'm on the board of the Sundance Institute, and the Sundance's primary thing is to teach filmmakers how to make film, independent filmmakers. So they have laboratories where they teach people how to make films, and more of the Academy Awards are coming out of the Sundance labs. And the number of documentaries is exploding. And my latest effort there is to try to convince Sundance to say, gee, every teenager has a filmmaking machine. What you should do is build online courses to upgrade and teach kids, teenagers, how to make film, how to make scripts, and how to make film using their phones. Focus on 7-minute films or 30-second films or whatever. But that's the next sort of phase in the communication in the world. That's
Ms.
gonna-
Scull?
I'm two paths, but since he's on that, the path is this whole
Come on.
how communication is changing, besides being, you know, the cloud and, you know, software being in the cloud. It's also increasingly, everything's multimedia, be it because of the phone. And so I think the desktop publisher of tomorrow, or probably today, is in fact, you know, like my teenage daughter. You know, they are completely fluent in all things digital. They don't think, you know, they don't think pieces of paper. They have iPads, they have smartphones, they have MacBooks. They don't think, you know, just words, even though there can be great writers, but they think visually. It's a very interesting, you know, literacy, and with it, the way they communicate. And I think it will have, the tools need to evolve with their sensibilities and their skill sets. But I think you'll see some transformative things happening over the next 15, 20 years in the way, you know, people communicate and do some pretty compelling stuff.
Well, let me ask you a question based upon that. We started talking about the printing industry and the typography and those kind of things.
Your pen.
And we've evolved into what we're talking about, this desktop
my pen, I
publishing.
think.
Desktop publishing.
It's okay.
But on a screen, is there a whole different nature of how things should look? Is there a whole different graphics picture? Is it a whole different way in which we want to present things, screen as against this? Paul?
Well, last night I was sitting next to Charles Simone, who unfortunately isn't here today. Charles said something that really resonated with me, and it kind of links back to 49 years ago. One thing we don't have is a shared working surface. We've got all these wonderful tools, but collaboration isn't nearly as easy. There are some screen sharing apps, but there's a bunch of different ones. They don't interoperate. And there's ways for our teenagers and our younger kids to be creating all this video and wonderful stuff that is getting locked into proprietary things like Facebook. It's all, eh. So what Charles would like to see, and I think he's right, what Doug Engelbart had in 1968 was a way for people to work together, a shared surface for people who aren't in the same room to reach into that surface and create together.
So, I can't resist giving a plug for a talk I gave to sort of conclude the tech project, and it also represents my final paper. I decided, and so if you're interested, you can look it up on the web under my name, and it's called An Earth-Shaking Announcement, and it's about a 25-minute video that you can find. So look under Knuth, An Earth-Shaking Announcement. Now, I gave this talk in San Francisco, right near where Steve Jobs would always make his announcements for the Macintosh and everything. And I announced the successor to tech, and it didn't only include things like 3D printing, but it went way beyond that, and included Facebook and Mathematica and Google and so on as a subset of the future successor of tech.
This is interesting. The paper, we all had the same thing, and now we can see the same thing because of PDF. We all have the same. But it's still, is it better, worse? Martin?
I think
I couldn't live without it.
we talked about today how the laser writer and PostScript started the desktop publishing by being able to get ink on paper in high quality. And what we would see on screen was always an approximation of what we would get on paper. And maybe even the laser writer was only an approximation of what we would get with a high-resolution linotype machine, but the goal was paper. And nowadays, we have a lot of content that is produced. Content means text and images and videos and all these things. And it's not produced to be put on paper. In the end, it's produced to be seen on screen. And, well, we have these things, and PDF works pretty bad on these devices. Because it's too small for a pre-formatted page. And we have spoken about HTML, which is a more flexible format. And when we spoke about HTML, well, I heard some negative words all around here because of the quality, because it was never designed as a language that presents, well, high quality output on mobile devices. And we are back to problems we had in the 70s with efficiency in space and time, because space and time costs in terms of battery lifetime. So we have to be efficient again, and all that growing memory costs battery. I think the next big step is getting publishing ready, not on the desktop, but for the desktop, for the screen, which is a new problem, and we have to solve it, because that's what young people use to read. They don't read books. They read like this on a mobile device. And we haven't solved it yet.
So yes, actually, I wanted to say a similar thing. Butler mentioned yesterday the fact that we haven't really made routine the layout issue. Still, people deal with layout, and layouts are not particularly adaptive to the devices or the situations in which they're required. Mobile's a perfect example. We're terrible at it now. And the real issue is more about what is the effect you want on the viewer, and how can we describe that and then do something quasi-automatic from that to cause something reasonable to happen. The closest I think we've come in our world so far is things like scribed styles. It doesn't go very far. It doesn't create the most typographically sophisticated layouts, but for most people, it does pretty well. We don't even have that for mobile devices. We don't know how to present the same information on the big screen and the little screen, and moreover, the poor user has to learn an essentially different user interface. The information isn't going to be in the same place. It may not even be called the same thing. There may not be a search box on one, but he or she depends on a search box on the other, et cetera, et cetera. And a related issue, I want to carry this one step further, which is actually something we started hand-waving about at Park in '73 or whatever, which is when people illustrate something, they usually have a goal in making that illustration. What are they trying to show? Even simple things like, suppose you have 10 years of revenue, like John's with Adobe. What is it you want to show? Do you want to show that it was always up and to the right? Do you want to show that in 1999 they had a problem and recovered? Do you want to show that after 1999 the growth really wasn't what it had been before? What is it you want to show? And going from some kind of notion of intent to how you might lay that out, what graphics you might choose, what colors you might choose, what things you omit, what ears you don't show, for example. All of that, it seems to me, is remotely within reason for some kind of automatic aids. Again, for those who are not so sophisticated, who don't have the extreme training, who aren't among the, what was it, 275,000 graphic artists, but maybe among the 8 million, or 8 billion, whatever it is. You know, we have vast uncharted challenges, it seems to me, of this sort.
Yeah, I wanted to, can I pick up on what Bob said?
Oh, I just wanted to make a short comment, which is there's a name for the, well, designers have to think about what you talked about when the screen size and proportions change. And they call the solution to that, which is a work in progress. They call it responsive design. So if you ever see the term responsive design.
Well, there are experiments in all of this, but nothing approaching what's needed.
What do you think of that new, well, not that new, it's now 2 or 3 years old, Canva? It's a desktop publishing in the cloud. It's an app. You know, it's on the iPad. It's you know, it's basically trying to be, I mean, they're selling, as far as I know, like a lot now. It's really taken off. Canva?
Canva, as in canvas without the S.
C-A-N-V-A.
Okay.
I mean, there's like, you know, millions of users now. And it's relatively inexpensive, but it's a desktop publishing, but it's all cloud SaaS model. You can get it on your iPad, you can get it on your iPhone, but it's also, you know, ideal on a Macintosh or a, you know, PC because it's web-based.
Jonathan?
I've got two thoughts here. One, just a quick thing before I get to my other thought. Back to what Bob Schroll said. Presentation does matter. Something on a screen is not the same as something on a paper. That's why so many of us, when we really want to read something, print it out and read it on paper. And something on a 27-inch monitor is not the same thing as on your iPhone. And that's, you know, that's an issue as everything becomes increasingly basically electronic. I think it's an issue we'll be with for a long time because we have such, you know, we have such evolving and such varied methods of presentation. This is probably one of the fundamental technical problems we face. I'm not sure what the solution is, but we have to recognize the fact that it is different. Seeing something on your phone is different from seeing it on a piece of paper, different from seeing on a big screen. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say was
going back to Liz's thing about giving everyone a voice, and I've got sort of mixed feelings about this. What I saw and started out to spend my life doing in graduate school, I visualized where we were going in sort of general terms. I don't think I visualized how far we would have gone in the 50 years since that time. I probably should have, but this is exactly where I had this sort of general idea that things were going, and exactly why. Because we have given everyone a voice. We have democratized information, and the implications are profound. We can all find all kinds of examples of this. But in the process, we have introduced some problems that we started talking about actually digital world in 1990 because we could see them coming, and they have come. First one is, with everybody a publisher, what happens is we're destroying the publishing industry, if you will. We're destroying the economic foundations of it, and we're destroying the jobs of editors, vetters, checkers, and things of this sort for the veracity of what's being published. The second thing is that we have, as we expected to do, we have created communities online of people who have like thoughts and like ideas and so forth that we never could have had before. And this is extremely powerful. But there's a downside to this that we really need to wrestle with. Very early on, probably 1991 or so, Sid Sheinberg, who was one of the two top people at Universal, after we'd made presentations of what was happening and so forth, immediately said that what you were talking about is a world in which I lose the mass audience. And he was talking about trying to sell something to them, but that dawned on me what he really also meant was we lose the mass community, the common community that's the larger community that has a sort of a common view of the world. And this is probably inevitable, but it's something we really need to wrestle with because there are dark sides to what we're doing as well as bright sides.
I wanted to pick up on what Bob says. I absolutely agreed that there are big unresolved problems, but in addition to that, many people have commented on the fact that a very important aspect, maybe the most important aspect of desktop publishing revolution has been that now many, many more people who are not professionals can do it. I think we still have a long way to go in that regard, though. There are a lot of things that are still fairly hard to do. I sit down and I'm not a serious Photoshop user, for example, but I use it occasionally. And I know that most of what Photoshop can do is a complete mystery to me. And every now and then I want to do something that's not at the tip of my fingers, and I go and I do web searches and futz around, and maybe I find some buttons that I can push, and maybe I get the desired result, and maybe I don't. It shouldn't be like that. I should be able to tell the system the effect that I want. And some combination of natural language understanding and machine learning, and it's having seen 50 million pictures that are similar to the one that I'm working on right now, should make it possible for it to make my job much, much easier than it is today. This isn't to say that there won't still be a role for professionals who are much more skilled at doing the things, but it should be much, and I think it will become much, much easier for relatively naive people to do things that now are far beyond their reach, just as producing a decent-looking 4-page newsletter was beyond their reach in 1970.
Let me follow that one more question with you. Voice, primary mechanisms, keyboards, drawing, things like that. Are any of the systems today responsive? I want a grayscale, I want it to look this way, draw me a circle. Why not? I make a lot of these, working on a spreadsheet. I want to put vertical lines and horizontal lines. I got to go through 5 or 6 steps to get that to happen. I could like to just tell the machine, hey, do it for me.
Indeed.
Anybody?
For simple cases, Knowledge Navigator.
Pardon me?
Knowledge Navigator, Apple's 1980s.
is like 85, 86. We had a visionary video that was done by our creative service and advanced technology group to kind of paint a picture of what we thought the world was going to look like in some period of time. We're actually pretty close to it.
Where is it?
But it was a pretty cool thought piece. It's called Knowledge Navigator.
John?
And you three points in response to Butler.
Just 1 minute, go ahead.
And then the last one on this. First of all, when I need help with Photoshop or something like that, I ask my kids. And they go, "Oh, Dad, don't you know?" That's fine. That's number one. Number two, I am intrigued by the statistic that there were 247,000 or whatever it was professional graphics people some time ago, and there are 8 million today. What I don't know, and maybe somebody does, is I presume those were 250,000 professionals who were making a living at it. And so we have 8 million people who are users of Creative Suite today, but does that mean there's a lot fewer than 247 professionals who are making a living, 47,000 professionals who do it for a living?
There are a lot more professionals making a living.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So the final point is, and why I hate prognosticating, because this is a moment where I become a glass half empty person, and the learning and insight, do what I mean, solve problems, the Knowledge Navigator video, which was a great myth. So over 20 years ago, we had a little startup with a couple guys and a bunch of AI and really cool system for natural language processing and semantic understanding. So it was not, it actually didn't do voice recognition, but you had some simple databases and they would tie them together, and you could ask questions like, who makes more than their boss and traveled to Paris between 2 and 7 weeks ago, which is a join across 4 different databases to give a reasonable semantic answer to this question. So I think of, we talk a lot about document publishing, movies, TV, but I was thinking Chuck is scanning all of his documents so he can search them. But he can't search for the semantic content. So for example, come April 15th, he needs to be able to ask, how many documents that I've scanned should have been sent to my accountant but haven't been sent yet? Okay? This is a really hard problem. This is so much harder than publishing what the hell the K1 looks like, to understand what's in it. And there's a lot of bullshit about AI right now that I do not believe. The vast majority of the questions that I ask of Siri...
You haven't asked of Alexa?
No, or any of them, come back with, here's what I found on the web, and it's a keyword search. And it's like, I'm sorry, this is a semantic question that a 6-year-old can understand, and I don't have I can do infinite search.
Your 6-year-old is really something with K1s.
No, not that one. But so I look at what I think of as lack of progress for 20 years on semantic understanding of all this information, and I am, we can look at Knowledge Navigator and dream about it, but I will bet a very fancy dinner that we won't have much progress in the next 10 years.
Paul, just a minute. Paul?
I was always proud of desktop publishing and that it extended the power of the press to a much larger audience, and I believed fervently in that concept. And when Boris Yeltsin, for example, took power in Russia, he used PageMaker to create a document on a Xerox copier, and that was the driving force. We didn't get paid for that copy of PageMaker, but neither did we did for the 20 or 25,000 copies that were in Russia. But today, though, I'm scared. I really am scared of the social use of this media and these tools that we've given to this broad audience. I was schooled in journalism. I got a master's degree. My thesis advisor was a guy named Gilmore that was the press law professor. So I had an ethics that was taught to me about how we in the press had a responsibility to the public to tell the truth, to tell truths, to investigate, to ask good questions. And some of the things I'm getting in my email box these days just scare the hell out of me.
Fake news?
Fake news, whatever you want to call it. I hate that term, but where people are using psychological profiling to target individuals with misinformation and to confuse the society and not serve the public, but serve their private or personal or political belief. And that scares me right now. We're losing control of a lot of this technology. We live all of us around this table are in this little liberal bubble or this privileged few of the world that we did well with. But look at all the rest of the people that are believing in this stuff. And that scares me. And I think we all have a personal responsibility to be thinking about that. We've created these tools. Now, how are they being used? And what can we do to perhaps make a difference in that respect? I don't have the answer by any means, but I'm scared.
Mark? Mark?
So I wonder about how design and publishing will move into the world around us. Basically, we've gone from, the 8.5 by 11 page to the screen, and now we're going smaller and smaller. So we're basically spending a lot of our lives looking at something the size of a business card. But even if that seems, like that's just the way it's going to stay, there have been people dreaming of, whether it's giant e-paper wall screens or augmented reality or virtual reality or the brain-computer interfaces or even objects that are active and computer-controlled. There's a number of possible ways that the visual world and other media are just going to break out of the boundary of the screen and the page. And I think that's what we need to think about going forward. What happens when the rectangle is not the only frame for a lot of this? And there's actually an interesting, if you go to the Disney store in San Francisco, you'll see a system that they did where they can control everything visual on every wall with projectors. So if the kid comes in for Tinkerbell's birthday, she flies around and the letters come on and give the name, and they can use simple controls for this entire environment. And that's one example of one direction. And the web was actually, HTML was originally designed, the reason it was device independent was, something like, say, the heading level 2 would be on a very, very simple text device. It might just be bolded. On something with real fonts, it would come out truly designed. For the deaf, it might simply speak more loudly than heading level 3. And in some big visual display, maybe you would get a different way to emphasize. So that whole idea of device independence, I think, may be more important as the parameters get broader as to how we display things.
Let me ask a question again of all of you. They talk about, in a car or in a plane, you have this projection with glasses or something. Is that something that's being worked on?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Where is it being done?
Many places.
Well, and in fact, speaking as an old fart,
Larry?
whose eyesight is disappearing or disintegrating or getting worse, the one advantage of the glasses is that it will largely get rid of the cell phone problem, namely making the screen so small. You can make the retinal image anything you choose. Now, the optics of the glasses may be intolerable for other reasons, but to compensate for all kinds of visual deficiencies, they could be a godsend.
I wondered. Who was next? And then, okay, Lee, go ahead, and then we'll go.
One of the things on your paragraph summary here is the connection to the internet and the web. And having worked on, Ventura Publisher, and we were putting tags back in the document, and looking back historically, it's like, wow, that looks a lot like HTML. It's like, and what I've been thinking about is like, how did we sort of miss, because we knew about hypertext from the stuff that Xerox was doing, how did we miss just creating a link between one of our documents and another one of our documents, and how do we miss the sort of opportunity that the internet did? And that's essentially publishing for the internet. And then the next big miss, in a way, is we really went from document publishing to, with Facebook, is self-publishing. And basically, when you put your profile into Facebook, when you tell all your likes and dislikes, you're essentially treating yourself and everything about you as a document. And now that is what's published to the web for everyone to see and search and target for advertising, and the things that Paul's talking about in terms of ability. When Facebook was first coming out, I was looking at the ad manager inside of Facebook, and their ability, if your mind wants to really be blown, go into, create an ad inside Facebook and look at all of the demographic slices that they can do, women, unmarried, I got to pick a different one. Let's say, people in Dubai, 18 to 20. And when I was testing this, and all the way down, education levels, likes the Beatles, hates gardening, all of these things basically you can narrow down. And what's so amazing that just blows your mind is it starts off with, okay, there's 1.8 billion people on Facebook. Okay, women, then it's, okay, 900 million. Live in Pacific Grove, California, 18 to 25. Okay, you're down to 13,000. Likes the Beatles. Okay, you're down to 140. And they're just shrinking they tell you the exact counts of these people down to these levels. And they took this out of the system, but when it first came out, you could do sexual preference. And so you could look for people in Saudi Arabia that were male, sexual preference, male. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, you could, if you were the Secret Service of Saudi Arabia, you could run ads and just to, free laptops or whatever, click here, and you could extract out of the population people that thought they were safe in terms of just, hey, I'm just on Facebook, just interacting with my friends, and yet you're targeted down because you essentially self-published your life. And so there's huge dangers here, and we're putting a lot of faith. I mean, I have a lot of faith in the folks at Facebook. Both my sons work at Facebook now, but so I definitely pay attention to what they're doing, but it's a lot of trust that we're putting into what do people do with our entire life picture.
Richard? My answer was directing it to Paul and Jonathan, but now to you too. I have a glass that is more than half full answer. Well, 70s, but technology, but I want you to direct you to 1400s, 600 years ago. When Gutenberg came out with the press, there was a big uproar. And the uproar was that now we are going to have books that is not the Bible, that is going to corrupt everybody's morals.
It did.
And it did. And it did. All right. So, we had Shakespeare, Dickens, we have all these riffraff publishing books that would not have been published without the press. So I'm an optimist because I've been around long enough. I believe that Moore's law is more than just transistor count. It's about all of us. And that is that it is our creativity. Yes, there are dumb, stupid things we do, and I speak for myself. But by and large, as a species, we tend to grow, and we grow exponentially. And every generation will grow faster than the others. No matter how dumb we are, including our president, sooner or later we will cover our tracks and do something better. The next generation. So your hypothesis is that we now have the ability to try a lot of things because of it's democratized, but we also can fail, and people can see it, we can self-correct,
Right.
we can iterate, and it is the process of being able to now more
Evolution.
quickly evolve
Right.
that you believe will lead to a more positive outcome.
Right. And it is really the...
I like that thinking,
is
I share
your-
it, so I fundamentally like it.
your exhibition down there. Evolution, right? So I am an optimist. I want to put that to you guys.
One comment that I think to what Paul said, if there's a problem, someone will try and solve it, no matter what rules or restrictions or limits. I still remember the people from Los Alamos. Give me a problem. There's a book by Kurt Vonnegut, I'm sure many of you have seen, called Player Piano.
Oh, of course.
He was at General Electric when I was there. But you tell that engineer, come up and solve that problem, he'll solve himself right out of a job. So it's part of and we'll all do it, right?
Just one comment about Richard's remarks. In the first 50 years of printing, from after Gutenberg to roughly 1500, despite all of these, some people accused the Gutenberg Bibles of being witchcraft because they were all identical, and as you say, they corrupt our morals. Roughly 12 million copies of books were printed in those 50 years, which is more than all the manuscripts hand-copied in the previous 2 or 3 centuries. So and that was one of the great explosions of information.
We are accelerating that explosion right here.
A few years ago, we did an analysis not of the number of books published, but of the number of authors who publish. This was 2009 in Seed magazine, and we plotted all this stuff. And of course, it's not quite exponential, but it's a very steep climb. And people said, well, we extrapolated a little too far because it would become, the entire population of the Earth. And really, it's bottoming out at about, 2-3 billion on Facebook and
Small
Twitter
number.
and so forth. So we're not there yet, but even presidents can be elected by becoming authors on Twitter.
Tom, you have not said anything yet. You always have thoughts on every subject.
Oh, well, as a historian, I spend a lot of time reading old stuff. And as a historian of computing, the old stuff I'm reading is often predictions about the future. And I see how terrible everybody is at it. So I'd be reluctant to do that. But I could ask a question about how the present could have been different, right? Because I'm working at the moment with Paul Ceruzzi on a third edition of his book, History of Modern Computing. And that's involving trying to tell the whole history of computing in a single book, which is probably going to have 1 to 2 paragraphs on desktop publishing. And in trying to pick and choose which topics to focus on, I think one of the things I try to do is get a sense of in which areas, say if a particular product hadn't succeeded or someone had never been born, we would basically have got to exactly the same point, in the evolution of technology and markets and users, except maybe a different person would have a private jet, right? Versus the ones where you can say, well, if someone hadn't had this idea at this point, maybe this completely different approach would have taken hold. Now, we heard one of those mentioned, for example, say if people had picked up on the collaborative working part of the Engelbart demo, and that had been baked into technologies all along, right, maybe we'd be in a completely different kind of world. So I would be interested to hear if anyone here can nominate something where they think that's one of those turning points, that if they or someone else had made a different design decision or had succeeded in something that they failed at or failed at something they succeeded at, that we would have not just taken a different path to get where we are now, but actually have finished up in a different place.
So let's go back to a question I asked earlier for the Apple guys. I would contend that if it were not for desktop publishing, Apple would not have survived the 1980s. And I would contend that our computing world would be very different now if that had happened. Okay? If we had been left without Apple and it had been Microsoft had been the dominant one.
No smartphone.
Okay, where would we be right now?
That's where we are.
That's my view.
But that's an interesting, I think a lot about what would have happened if Steve had stayed versus if Steve had left, and what effect that had. But it may be, it's kind of like his, I don't know, it's kind of like his speech or commencement speech that he did at Stanford, that you really never know about your life until you sometimes look back and you see that, in fact, your history is what allowed you to get where you are. And you can't always plan it. I think a lot of that also applies here, in that maybe the iPhone, which is transformative, may not have happened the way it was if Steve hadn't gotten kicked out and gone and done Next and failed and then came back having learned a lot and grown personally and done a bunch of other things. So it's a interesting, make a good movie,
Yes.
Anybody else want to comment on, go ahead, David.
I would like to hear what Butler is trying not to say.
Charles Fort said it long ago. He was kind of a kook, but he said some sensible things. And one of them is that you'll get railroads when it's time to railroad. For the most part, things show up when at least in the kind of society that we're accustomed to living in, things show up when the underlying technology, whatever it is, makes it possible for them to show up. And if Bob Taylor hadn't been there doing Park, the whole world of graphical, distributed personal computing would have been delayed maybe by 5 years, but certainly not by 20 years. And I believe that's true for absolutely everything that anyone has mentioned.
You don't think that things take a different direction?
Not dramatically different. No. And if
In other words, if Hitler had not come into power, you don't think that would have changed the world?
But let's not talk about that one.
I think we're shifting topics.
I'm sorry. I back off. Excuse me.
Well, look at from a 100-year perspective. Look at Germany today. Right? We covered all our mistakes. We all die. We die with our mistakes, and the next generation will pick up, and hopefully, we hope, they will do the right thing. Right? Those of us with children, right?
I like Richard's world a lot. I like to live in that world.
He is the proverbial.
Yeah.
It's a world I love to think about. and
Well,
view.
that time horizon that you have time to fix the mistakes, and if you don't get to them, maybe your grandchildren will or something like that. So
Yeah, when you
that's
get to
good.
be 70, you say, why the hell didn't I see this?
Maybe
50
not-
years ago, I'd be rich.
Maybe not with
some of
global
us.
warming.
If you think 100 years from now, there will be no global warming. It will get up. All right? We have enough power, solar energy coming down, to reverse any CO2 that we can generate, if we can figure out how to capture that. Right? Okay?
when people tell me that the world is coming to an end because of X or Y, I tell them that they should go and read the Strategic Bombing Survey, which was commissioned by the US and UK Air Forces after World War II to find out whether the strategic bombing program, which dropped a lot of bombs over Germany during World War II and killed, so no question, it killed hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed a lot of infrastructure. But the goal of it was to cripple the German war material producing economy, and it failed. The reason it failed is that the systems are much, much more resilient than anyone understands, never mind the doomsayers. And the doomsayers say, there's some relatively minor perturbation going on here, and I can construct a scenario in which it will amplify and terrible things will happen. It's not what actually happens. What happens is that people compensate in one way or another. And it might be, the compensation might be very painful, but it's going to happen.
May I ask one last
The world is
question
not going to come to an end.
before we break up here? You talk still, we still talking about desktop publishing. And I have 3 questions. Is it really desktop? Is it really publishing anymore? Is it some other form, other level of communication that we're calling it the railroad when we should be calling it the transportation system? Isn't this now the communication system?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Totally
Desktop
appropriate to call it publishing.
was a great term when John Skoll was helping
Make it
Apple.
happen.
It's
Is
no
it-
longer relevant.
Is it limiting? That's what I was,
No,
that's
it's
really
no
what I want to
longer
get
relevant.
to.
But it's
You-
not limiting.
You still call yourself that.
No. All those signs came, it's all about communication.
Publishing also means making something public. It's not about private communication, it's making communication to the public, publishing. And it's still publishing
bandwidth
what
has
we are
increased quite a
talking
bit.
about.
Interesting use of the word.
I mean, the whole thing here is democratizing publishing, okay? Publishing taking in a broad sense of making information public.
We now are 10 minutes of 5.
Smartphone
And
publishing.
unless somebody objects violently, we're going to go to the last part of our program, which is not on your program.
Unfair.
I've been holding something back. Come on, you can always do that.
It's the right thing.
What I'd like to do, we have a lot of material that we didn't give you ahead of time because I knew that you would look at it. And we preferred to have you involved in discussion. And we did just show you some pictures, and I finally gave Jonathan the chance to explain what those were. But we've given you some folders to take home, and it has some things in it. Let me just mention what they are, and hopefully you'll look at some of them maybe, and before you throw them in the waste paper basket, but recycle, remember. Jonathan prepared a first and second and third draft, actually, of a short history of the industry. And he would like to expand that, and I would like him to very much, so we can use it as part of the record for this and for some future work. So please, take the time to read over what he's had, send him your thoughts and comments, and so he can add them on. Now, he's put it in PDF form so that none of us can touch it, change it, or modify it, only he. It drove me up the wall. I wanted to edit it in Word. He, of course, wouldn't let me do the darn thing. So there's still typos in there, but I didn't want to mention that.
The way you know, the current version of Word does a pretty good job of reading in PDF and turning it into a Word document, as long as the formatting is not too complex.
I see. His format is more complex than I can handle. I'm not at that level. Secondly, I do want to, not in there, but we will please think about what you can donate. Don't die with this stuff lying there for your kids to take care of. We've had too many cases of that happening. Don't throw it away because no one cares about it. Please, see what you have. If you want help in doing these things, we can find people that will help you, organize your material and take care of it. David is raising his hand. Next, there's a simple description of Computer History Museum. We really hope you'll take a look at their website. For those of you who are in the area, come visit. Those who aren't in the area, make a special trip. It's worthwhile, and it's always fun. They have something new every year. There is an article by a friend of mine that was in the Annals some years ago about Mergenthaler going into the newspaper business at that point in time. It's an interesting project management story. And he was hired as a consultant in 1978 and worked there, 76, I guess, worked to 82. The Daily News, which was then the largest newspaper in the United States, used the Mergenthaler stuff. He did stuff in Australia. There was a brilliant technical guy that worked with him, a fellow named George Trimble. You have a copy of that article. It's a fun thing to see what somebody who knew nothing about the newspaper business was able to help make some of these newspapers automated. And his stories, of course, about the union are fairly difficult at that place. We have the John Siebold assessment of the Apple versus Adobe contretemps, whatever the hell that means, and his thoughts about the thing. Your sister, it was in one of her
Well, let me
newsletters?
just say, that was something that I'd written top of my head in like 5 minutes in a discussion forum that my sister then published. Having talked to John and Chuck about some of this stuff, I haven't shown this to them. I said I thought that John would object to it. I think that there are errors in that, serious errors in that.
Okay, well, then John has an opportunity to fix it.
It's not something I would want to leave on the record.
Okay.
By the way, on that, I would say basically the history thing, the origin of that basically was when Bert called me. First thing I did was try to write down for myself how this stuff fits together. So that was done out of my head for my own use in trying to organize thoughts. And I made some changes to it to include some things that were being put on this program. But it was done on the top of my head. I want to revise it now based upon a lot of stuff we've heard here. But it may serve as a skeleton in which we could build a more complete short history. By short, I mean we're just trying to get the highlights and not all the details. So I would really appreciate comments, suggestions, arguments, everything, so we could try to make that, and I will circulate that back to anybody who wants to, so we can try to make something that maybe put something on the record that does show in some way how this stuff ties together.
Sure, it gets to David at that point. Next, we have the Software Industry Sig. We would hope that some of you people might be interested in the broader subject of collecting software history, not just necessarily in your own areas, but in some of the others. And we did a little bit about what we've done over the last 16 years, the use of the annals and the articles that are in there. Please, I hope some of you, not just for a special issue, but might have some ideas of articles you'd like to write for the annals. That gets them, they're there, and your ideas are available forever. Core Magazine, he showed you before, that's a once-a-year publication. It's very high quality now. I won't speak about the graphics and stuff because that's not skilled. But take a look at some interesting things and a good description of what he's done. And then as the final piece in there, Jonathan Siebold in 1980 forecast what he thought the future of the world was going to be. It's It was a whole article, and he just extracted 2 pages, which are very poorly copied with PDF. And, but they're there. Take a look at it. There's something to laugh about and have fun looking at. And I
That
want
was,
to thank all of you for.
Those pages are from a book my father wrote, in which he summarized the thing, okay? That's why it's just a photocopy of stuff out of the book. But the point is that, and this gets back to what Butler was saying, basically, that, this is where the graphic arts industry was going, where the publishing industry was going before desktop publishing. This was written in 1980, before the PC, before anybody knew about Star, but it was saying basically, we're going to graphic terminals, we're going to interact, we're going to WYSIWYG, we're doing all this stuff, we're going to network stuff, we're going to 16-bit computers, we're going to networking. And so the point here is that this is where the industry was heading, and it is because it was already thinking that way and heading that way that the desktop, I believe, the ground was fertile already, that people understood this was going to be the future, and here suddenly was that future in a small, affordable box.
I want to close by thanking Jonathan for the tremendous amount of help he gave in starting. And I think most of you, many of you would not have been there if Bert Grad wrote you a note. And you're all here because Jonathan Siebold was on board. And I thank you all very much.
Thank you to you, Bert, for getting me together with my friends. Thank you very much.